Hello and welcome to TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Welcome aboard the Eastern Express. When analysts talk about the economic dependence of Belarus on Russia, they usually mention loans, subsidies, discounted crude, or integration projects dressed up as economic cooperation. But there's no better snapshot of the real relationship than what is happening right now with gasoline. Russia has a problem, therefore Belarus suddenly has a problem. That is the logic of the Union state in practice. Minsk has quadrupled its gasoline exports to Russia to help cover shortages caused by Ukrainian drone strikes. The problem? Well, Belarus doesn't actually have that much to spare. When Moscow fills its own tanks first, it's always Belarusian consumers who end up running on fumes. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Belarus has once again come to the Kremlin's rescue. This time, not with political loyalty, but with gasoline. As Ukraine's drone attacks cripple Russian refineries, Minsk oil exports have quietly become Moscow's emergency fuel line. In just the first 20 days of October, sales of Belarusian gasoline on the St. Petersburg exchange skyrocketed more than threefold year over year. Kommersant reports that the peak came on October 15th, when 5.7 thousand tons were sold in a single day. The surge helped stabilize Russia's volatile wholesale market, where sales has plunged to a 2-year low in September. But behind this temporary relief lies a deeper problem. Moscow refining sector remains severely damaged, with repairs dragging on and shortages still reported in several regions. For Belarus, the lifeline to its eastern neighbor is also a risk. Every additional ton sent to Russia drains domestic supply and could push up prices at home. Analysts note that while Belarusian refineries can expand exports, they cannot replace Russia's lost capacity. Even running flat out, their production remains limited. Lou Lvovsky from the Baroque think tank sums up the paradox in one sharp metaphor.
If we go too far and send too much gasoline to Russia, it may turn out like with potatoes. After potatoes disappear, gasoline will too.
Belarus may be helping Russia avert an immediate fuel crisis, but is doing so at the cost of its own reserves and possibly its own stability. A short-term game that could, in time, leave both countries running on fumes. In the energy game between allies, even friendship burns at a price.
Now let's zone in on the explaining portion of our show. In Belarus, the president has found an unlikely new culprit for traffic disruption: coffee drinkers. After Alexander Lukashenko blamed queues at gas stations not on fuel shortages, but on motorists stopping for snacks, the country's police were sent on a nationwide hunt for offenders.
For days, special traffic police teams have been patrolling Belarusian gas stations looking for, quote, queue violators. The operation was launched after Lukashenko ordered officials to deal with what he called a national nuisance: drivers leaving their cars by the pumps while sipping coffee and eating hot dogs. But when inspectors finally reported back, they found, well, nothing. According to the Interior Ministry's traffic chief, there were no queues at all. Gas stations operated normally, with no fines issued and no need for extraordinary measures. Operators told independent media that customers simply learned the new rules: fill up, move your car to the parking lot, then grab your coffee. At one Belarus Neft station in Minsk, staff assured drivers that they could enjoy a latte as long as they didn't block the pump. Anything is possible, they said, if, quote, others can still drive up. What began as a presidential decree to control queues has turned into a light-hearted snapshot of everyday Belarus. No shortage, no protest, just a government effort to keep coffee drinkers in line, one parking spot at a time.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Russia is facing its most serious supply disruption since the start of the war. And it's not because of Western sanctions, it's because of Ukrainian drones. Kyiv has spent months systematically targeting Russian refineries and petrochemical facilities, and the effect is no longer abstract. Up to 40% of Russia's refining capacity has been temporarily taken offline. Some regions imposed purchase limits, others froze prices, and even state-controlled fuel distributors admitted shortages of the most popular gasoline grades. And when Russia's self-proclaimed energy superpower cannot fuel its own domestic market, well, there's only one direction it can look: its most captive ally. That is why Belarusian fuel exports to Russia jumped fourfold in September. This is not an opportunistic windfall for Minsk, it's a geopolitical obligation. Moscow frames it as integration. In reality, though, it's extraction. Belarus is no longer a trading partner, it's becoming a strategic buffer stock. Now, on paper, Belarus produces around 4 million tons of gasoline per year. That sounds like a lot, until you compare it to Russia's proposed monthly intake of 300,000 tons. If maintained for a full year, Russia alone would consume nearly all Belarusian output. That leaves little margin for Belarus's own domestic demand, and even less for the only part of the system that still actually earns hard currency: exports to third countries. Belarus does not rely on its own crude production. It refines Russian oil and then resells higher value fuels abroad. This is one of the few functioning profit channels left in the Belarusian economy after 2020. But Moscow now expects Minsk to divert those flows away from paying clients and toward the Russian domestic market, where prices are merely political, not commercial. If Belarus complies fully, then it sacrifices revenue and foreign currency intake. And if it doesn't, Moscow has tools to punish, deniable and bureaucratic enough to never look like coercion on paper. Short term, Belarus may not run out of fuel entirely. There is capacity to stretch, reroute, and ration. But long term, the arithmetic is unforgiving. Even at full output, the system cannot satisfy Moscow, satisfy domestic demand, and keep earning export revenue. So either Minsk loses money by giving Russia priority, or it risks retaliation by trying to preserve its export model. And it is happening at the exact moment when Belarus arguably has the least leverage it has had in decades. Since 2020, Lukashenko is politically dependent on the Kremlin for survival. Now, the energy sector is sliding into the same dependency curve. The question is no longer, will Belarus have enough gasoline? Technically, probably yes. The real question is, how much sovereignty is Minsk willing to burn through to keep Moscow's tank full? And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Alan Flowers, chairman at the Anglo-Belarusian Society. Alan, thanks for being with us here on Eastern Express.
Yes, thank you, and greetings from Edinburgh in Scotland. I also have to point out, although I am indeed the chair of the Anglo-Belarus Society, and that's how I have very good contacts with Belarus and Belarusians in UK, I am, of course, speaking independently and on my own behalf today.
Very good to know, Alan. So let me get straight into it. Now, according to Reuters sources, gasoline deliveries by rail from Belarusian refineries to the domestic Russian market rose to 49,000 tons. That's about 14,500 barrels per day in September. Diesel deliveries totaled 33,000 tons. Let me ask you this. Why has Belarus suddenly increased its gasoline exports to Russia?
Well, of course, as we know, Ukrainians have been very successful in damage to Russian petrochemical plants. There are shortages of domestic supply in Russia, so it is no surprise that Mr. Putin is turning to Mr. Lukashenko. We won't grace him with anything else other than that. There is some slack in the two refineries that Belarus have. Belarus has a refinery near Novopolotsk in the north, the Naftan, and also in the south, Mosier, a bit nearer the Ukraine border. And together, these are capable of around about 12 million tons a year. I'm years confused because these figures we've just heard, the tens of thousands extra being pulled across to Russia, that is really only quite a small fraction of the refining capacity. And the last figures I saw were that Belarus was only running at about 75% of capacity. Now, what that means is there's a spare 3 million tons product output available, which cut down to a month is 250,000. So we shouldn't hear these numbers and think this is going to be a big problem to draw away from Belarus domestic supply. So it's quite clear the reason. Ukraine's been effective, and Putin's having to go shopping to his friendly neighbor.
So, I mean, it's interesting that you say that. So then how dependent is Russia really on Belarus for fuel at this point?
Well, dependency, this is really quite a small fraction of, at a few percent level of the requirements for Russia. There are, of course, potential other sources, and I'm sure Russia could go elsewhere, but it's really quite easy. I mean, there's the links. There's been long-term, since Soviet times, energy links, pipelines between Belarus and Russia.
Do you think that the fuel shift can actually create shortages inside Belarus itself?
No, I mean, I mentioned these figures, and I'm sorry to baffle our listeners with lots of numbers, but the numbers are important. There is slack, and in fact, assuming that the Belarus refineries can get up to full capacity. Now, there have been issues there because there are reports that, in fact, production was significantly down in the first half of this year. These could be for technical operational reasons at the plants. I'm not party to exactly what their capability is and why they're not running at full capacity. But these sorts of numbers, if we take it over a year, your 50,000 tons per month, that's converting to 600. It's still less than 10% of the refining capacity that Belarus has at these two major oil refining plants. So unless Putin's demands ramp up, and this is where we get into could it cause shortages? It really all depends on the extent to which Mr. Putin leans on and causes further demands on Belarus. At the present moment, if we are seeing pictures of queues, these have actually been reported to be for other reasons. I'm glad to see that we showed a picture to have a benzene, a petrol station that was really not that many cars around. And that's actually what my friends in Minsk, I did check my contacts as of last night, were saying, no, there's no verifiable issues nowadays, just now, at the moment.
Let me ask you this. How do you think this growing energy cooperation actually affect Belarus's economic independence?
What independence? Belarus is no independence at the moment. At least they've got a sovereignty. There is a separate president there, as he is referred to by himself. There's a separate. I think we better reverse and correct that. There's a man in charge among the lands of Belarus called Mr. Lukashenko for Mr. Putin, and this whole energy issue is very much a matter of perhaps at times quite difficult negotiation. Of course, it works the other way. I mean, Belarus is very dependent on the Russian gas supplies. And that's something the Soviet Union made sure about the republics decades ago, in the 60s, 70s. Belarus energy resources were neutered. There used to be a lot of renewable resource, even peat. In fact, when Poland had Western Belarus, something of interest to the TVP viewers in Poland, some might be old enough to know that Poland had a marvelous energy infrastructure relying on small hydro in Belarus. Belarus has a lot of potential to be a lot more energy independent. But in the Soviet Union, they didn't want that. Mr. Putin doesn't want that. And they're using, gas is a big negotiating tool. Not only the benzene issue with these two petrochemical plants we've got, but energy is big politics and always has been for the Belarus-Russia relationship. And the sooner we get a truly independent Belarus, the better for the Belarusian people. They wouldn't be behest to having to pay off Mr.
Right.
Putin, being paid off by Mr. Lukashenko to help keep him in power.
Speaking of an independent Belarus, Alan, let me ask you this, and maybe there's something more that you can tell me about this. Now, the source here that I have is from Reuters. Now, a senior Belarusian diplomat has recently held meetings with European diplomats. Now, do you think that this could be an overture towards the European Union after a supposed thaw with Washington?
Well, it's in principle, it's always good to talk. I'm a artist, was interested in social and political matters, and maybe no diplomat. But I'm very aware that in the Belarus Democratic Forces there are very much two views, that there really shouldn't be. One view is there shouldn't be negotiations with a tyrant government like Mr. Lukashenko's that is daily still imprisoning people on political grounds, is very much a threat to Europe's security because of the relationship with Mr. Putin, and because of some of the actions that have taken place on the border. Poland knows all too well about the illegal and the forced immigration that's taking place on the border. So Europe's got a lot more close problems than maybe America has. On the other hand, there is the other view amongst the Belarus Democratic Forces that says, well, let's take things step by step. Let's be prepared to talk, negotiate a little. And of course, there's always the issue, well, political prisoners shouldn't be barters or a commodity, because after all, what we know is Mr. Lukashenko, he might release 52, but he tops up with another 50 or 52. And that's one point. I'm pleased to be able to reference this, because the media makes a lot of noise about releases. We don't hear enough about the constant drip, drip, drip. So that's keeping our considerable unpopularity in Europe. But obviously good to talk, and there are channels within the Belarus government. We don't know, but we've seen Mr. Lukashenko flip-flop over the 30 decades he's been in power, and a flop towards Europe wouldn't be entirely amiss maybe at this time. But Mr. Putin's got the bases there. Mr. Putin is very much using his manager of those lands and will continue to do so for as long as he can.
Alan, just before I let you go, because we're almost out of time, just very briefly, if you can tell me, I mean, you spoke here about, Lukashenko over decades and decades, of course, being in power, and you also talk about these continuous releases of former political prisoners, some of them which actually were Belsat journalists. Let me ask you very briefly, Alan, you're talking about this, but what do you think the future holds for Belarus? And I will, you've been using the word decade. I'll ask you this. What do you think the future for Belarus can actually realistically hold? All right, I won't say decade, but let's say in the next 5 years, just very briefly, Alan, please.
Decade. Well, let's remember the continuous is hardly continuous releases, though the continuous thing is actually the continual imprisonments on almost a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. We don't get releases on that type of basis. The decades is the fact he's now been 31 years in power since July 1994. The future, look, the Belarus people in their heart are Europeans, and they want a European, free, democratic Belarus. And in the end, it is very difficult. We know from history. It might not be next year or the year after, but I sincerely believe, and I wouldn't have been doing this for 30 odd years, supporting the Belarus Democratic Forces, if I didn't believe that one day we will see a very friendly, free, might be independent, might not necessarily be in the European Union, but I think there will be much stronger relations and very good relations as there have been in the past, particularly between Belarus and Poland, but
Thank
certainly
you so
Belarus,
much,
Europe, and
Alan
certainly
Flowers,
UK.
Chairman at the Anglo-Belarusian Society, for being with us here on Eastern Express. Thanks so much. And we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Vladimir Putin says ties with North Korea are progressing according to plan as Pyongyang deepens its role in Russia's war in Ukraine.
During a Kremlin meeting with North Korean Foreign Minister Cho Sung-hee, Russian President Vladimir Putin reaffirmed strategic cooperation with Kim Jong-un's regime. Putin stressed that joint goals discussed last month in Beijing remain on track. Under a mutual defense pact signed in 2024, North Korea has sent thousands of troops and large quantities of ammunition and missiles to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to South Korean intelligence, over 2,000 North Korean soldiers have already been killed in action. Russia's foreign ministry said Cho also met Sergei Lavrov, with both sides blaming the United States for rising tensions on the Korean peninsula and vowing to expand bilateral ties in Asia.
Russia's energy minister admits that drone strikes and refinery shutdowns have caused the country's worst fuel price spike in years.
Gasoline prices in Russia have soared 11.6% since January, with the Russian energy minister linking the crisis to refinery disruptions and panic buying. In an interview with TASS, he said Ukrainian drone attacks forced shutdowns at more than 20 oil plants since August, crippling output. Independent reports confirm shortages in over 50 regions, with state-imposed price caps and export bans unable to contain the fallout. Record-high wholesale price in August and September stoke fans of wider supply instability. The minister said seasonal demand drops and maintenance completion should ease the pressure soon, but warned the government is readying further interventions to ensure fuel supplies across the country.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching and see you next time.